me just make this point right in the beginning, that having been in Washington 52 years now, I've seen a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes in importance, and that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media, and that is big. That could not be bigger. Thomas Jefferson, he was asked, if you had a choice between a government and a free press, what would you choose? He said, no problem, free press, because without a free press, you're going to get a dictator. But to think about why these Flüchtlinge are here, that is dangerous, because it might talk about how the United States attacked Iraq and destroyed that country. It might talk about what's happened in Syria, how that country has been destroyed. 4 million Flüchtlinge from Iraq. 2 million had to leave their homes and stayed in Iraq, 2 million in the surrounding countries. Syria, again, 4 million. I mean, these boggle the mind. So, first time I encountered the corruption, or one could say the prostitution of intelligence, was during Vietnam. Now, I knew that my colleagues held that there were 500,000 Vietnamese communists under arms in South Vietnam. But General Westmoreland, he wouldn't accept any more than 299,000 Viet communists under arms. And so I asked my friend Sam Adams, who was responsible for this area, I said, Sam, doesn't make any sense. You know, generals need to exaggerate the threat from the enemy. Why is Westmoreland diminishing the threat from the enemy? And he said, Ray, he said, you know, with the kill count, we're killing so many hundreds each week, each day sometimes, and the press in Saigon is not really bright, but they can do arithmetic, you know. And so if we tell them now that it's more than 299,000, well, there was a cable. Now, General Abrams, who was an excellent tank commander under Patton in this country, in Italy, he was really bright, but he wasn't, he was really good tank commander, not so bright in terms of politics. He wrote a cable, and I will quote from it. He wrote a cable on the 20th of August, 1967, and it said, we can't possibly accept the higher numbers of the enemy, quote, because we have been projecting an image of success in this war, and there's no way that we could avoid the press from drawing an erroneous and gloomy conclusion, period, end quote. There it was, in black and white. There were twice as many enemy in South Vietnam, and the political generals were deliberately disguising that and saying there were only half as many as there were. Why? Because then they couldn't project an image of success in this war.
So in the period before the United States attacked Iraq, which was March 2003, sort of before and during the war, I was the branch chief in charge of media analysis for Iraq in the Central Intelligence Agency's open source center that monitored all the media. So we were monitoring the speeches of Saddam Hussein and analyzing the Iraqi press. And in the weeks just prior to the war, my office received a call from the office of Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. And the request that I received from this office was that we should look in Iraqi media for the connection between Al-Qaeda and the government of Saddam Hussein. So when I received this request, we had to go out to our bureau in Amman, Jordan, where we monitored Iraqi media, and to all our other sort of contacts, media contacts in the Middle East. And we searched everywhere in Iraqi media for evidence of a link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, and we found absolutely none. So I went back to Deputy Defense Secretary Wolfowitz and said, no, we don't have any evidence of that. And I thought that would be the end of things. But about 2 weeks later, our office received exactly the same request. Again, please find us the link between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. So again, we exerted every effort. We pulled out all the stops, so to speak. And again, the response came back, sorry, we can't find anything. There's no evidence of this connection. So oddly enough, we kept getting this request until it became very evident to me that our office was not providing Wolfowitz with the correct answer. So this is just a small example of the kind of pressure that we were starting to come under. And I finally advised my superiors that I was going to go back to Mr. Wolfowitz's office and ask them, what is the original source of this allegation? Maybe it would help us in our search if you could tell us where you got this idea in the first place. And of course, the office of Paul Wolfowitz never got back to me on that. And that's just a small example of the kind of subtle political pressure that analysts within the CIA and in the intelligence community at large were starting to experience in the run-up to the war.
And we have this Bill of Rights in the Constitution, 10 amendments, and they're really golden. The first one is why I can speak here freely to you, and the second, well, the fourth one is supposed to protect our internet and our telephone conversations. That's been violated. And the fifth one is, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Whoa, wow. Well, does that mean you're not supposed to kill American citizens like Al-Awlaki? Well, it used to mean that. But now the Attorney General, the head of the law part of our government, tells us, well, no, it says due process. It doesn't say judicial process. And so we do the due process right here in the White House. Thank you very much. We don't need the courts. Hans Blix, who was head of the International Atomic Energy Agency at the time, commented, you know, it is very, very interesting that they had 100% certainty that there were weapons of mass destruction and 0% certainty about where they might be. That's how bad it was.
I thank you, and just for you, Director Clapper, again on the surveillance front, and I hope we can do this in just a yes or no answer, because I know Senator Feinstein wants to move on. Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Not wittingly. Well, we know the truth on that, don't we? And we have Edward Snowden to thank for that. Now, Clapper, of course, was fired as soon as he lied under oath. Correct?
No.
No, he wasn't. Where is he now? What's Clapper doing now? Anybody know? He's the new head of all U.S. intelligence.
Oh boy.
The CIA, the NSA, intelligence of the State Department, the Defense. He is the director of national intelligence. What is the point I'm trying to make here? You're a B&D, and your government is being fed by a bunch of crooks and liars, okay? And there's a very important lesson there. The President of the United States is not a free man when it comes to the intelligence services. He's afraid of them. It's understandable that he's concerned, but I don't think a person like that should have run for President of the United States if he was going to be so afraid of the intelligence services. After Iraq, after the debacle having to do with intelligence on Iraq, and the destruction of Iraq itself, the people in Washington thought, well, Bush and Cheney, they have their sights set now on Iran. And maybe we need to do a national intelligence estimate on how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon. And somebody said, yeah, you know, we can't go through what we did on Iraq. Let's get somebody honest in to do an estimate, to manage an estimate. And they had to go to the State Department. But they found an honest man, very experienced, very clever. His name was Tom Finger. He's a recipient of our Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence. He had been the head of the State Department intelligence outfit. He came over, brought some of his expert, honest analysts, and all during 2007, they labored on a bottom-up assessment from all the evidence of where Iran was in terms of building a nuclear weapon. Now, they did this in secret, and they had some luck mid-year when they got some new intelligence. But in November of 2007, they issued a national intelligence estimate unanimously. That means all 16 intelligence agencies of our government. There were only 12 when I was on active duty. All 16, quote, with high confidence, judged. Now listen to this. Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. Now that judgment was reaffirmed, revalidated every year between 2007, when this estimate came out, and till today. So what I'm saying here is that an honest job was done, and it prevented the war that Cheney and Bush fully intended to start, not finish, before they left office in 2008. You remember Syria in August of 2013, with those chemical weapon attacks on the 21st of August outside Damascus? Do you remember that? The big, now, Obama had said, you know, that would be a red line. You know, if you use nuclear weapons, Bashar al-Assad, that's a red line. And so, guess what happened? There were some attacks there. Now, what did our colleagues say? Well, let's look at the sarin that was used, the nerve gas. It's not from Syrian government stocks. It's homemade stuff. So, Mr. President, you're being mousetrapped, okay? Those people who want you to intervene in this Syrian conflict openly are trying to mousetrap you by going back to what you said, red line, red line, red line, and then accusing Bashar al-Assad, as John Kerry did 35 times before a press conference at the State Department on the 30th of August, 2013. Who has the black boxes from the Malaysian aircraft? Anybody know? The British. Yeah. Why do the British have the boxes from the Malaysian aircraft? You know, that really stinks. And while I'm on the subject, our colleagues were able to prevent John Kerry from getting up and saying, I have an intelligence assessment that said the Russians or the pro-Russians knocked down that plane. And so we didn't get an intelligence assessment. We got something called a government assessment. A new genre, new animal, okay? What does that mean? That means it was prepared in the White House, not in the intelligence community. Well, the next day, Obama arrived in Petersburg for a summit. And that same day, Mr. Putin felt that he had to comment on John Kerry, and he said, "On врет, он знает, что врет, это печально," which means he's lying, he knows he's lying. This is really sad. So as Obama arrives in Petersburg, Putin, now I've never heard a Soviet president or general secretary call our Secretary of State a liar before, but clearly Putin thought he had the goods on, and he knew, I believe, that Obama knew also that Kerry tended to, well, we say, exaggerate. There are a lot of honest intelligence analysts also in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they are reporting what they're seeing with ISIS. And they send these reports to their generals, and when they see them published, they've been changed. The good news, of course, is there are these analysts that are speaking out, and somebody must have leaked it to the press. The bad news is that the mainstream media is so corrupt that they take dictation, they take notes from what the White House Sprecher says, and they publish that in the New York Times the next day. And so Americans are completely bereft of information. I had a very educated, a very astute gentleman ask me the other day, why did the Russians shoot down that plane over Ukraine? Now, I have to say, 90% of Americans believe the Russians did it. Why? Because that's what they're told by the mainstream media.
In November 2002, obviously just a few months before the United States launched its attack in Iraq, I was invited as an Iraq analyst, which I was in 2002, to participate in war games that were sponsored by the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the purpose of the war games was to play out various post-war scenarios in Iraq. What would Iraq look like after a U.S. invasion? And so we played the roles of various political factions and such. And on the final day of the war games, I was seated next to a gentleman who was originally from Iraq, but he was American, married to an American, and he was present at the war games because he was the husband of an American professor there. And while we were listening to the conclusions of the war game, I could see that this gentleman, while he had dark glasses on, tears were coming down. I could see the tears on his cheeks. And I turned to him and I asked him, what is wrong? Can I help? And his response to me was, here at this conference, at these war games, we're discussing political, military, strategic implications of a possible war on Iraq, but nobody here is talking about the humanitarian consequences. No one here is talking about the hundreds of thousands and even millions of Iraqi people, and he said, my people, that are going to die. And when he stated this to me, I tried to think of something to console this man, and I couldn't think of anything to say to him. I was sort of stunned into silence. And then at that very moment, I just felt extremely ashamed that I was even there at these war games, because he was absolutely right. Nobody there was discussing the humanitarian aspects, as if these wars were sterile and as if nobody was ever killed. And this is the kind of psychopathic mentality that I find is endemic in Washington, where elites are planning these kinds of wars, these kinds of attacks, thinking only of political, economic, military benefits, profits from selling arms, and the humanitarian equation is just completely removed from the picture.